Hello, this is Bruce Ramsey. The date today is December. It is December 22nd, 1992. And what I'm about to read to you is the ending to my novel called Newton as a Man. And the story, it's the last story in the book called Escaping from Sardonna. And I wrote this version. It's the latest version to the ending, uh, December 18th, 1992. Just finished it yesterday. And believe it or not, I've been working on this story on and off for the past 4 years, maybe more. And so it better be good. That's all I can say. So sit back and watch the conclusion, the exciting, dramatic conclusion of Escaping from Sardonna, the last story of Newton as a Man. Shirley ran up to the general, who was called Zelnos, and begged him to call off the attacks. The general just laughed with loud, maniacal laughter. And again the little craft was hit. "Ayah!" cheered all who viewed the attack. When some electrical fires sprang up out of the control panel, Newton desperately turned to Sheena, saying, "Sheena, I don't want to have to use this, but it's the only thing that will save us." When another missile was launched at them, Newton pressed a precarious button that caused the ship to quickly shoot to the side at an incredible rate of speed. The missile that was meant for them missed its target. Instead, it struck the side of a skyscraper, blowing glass, concrete, and people out of its side before raining them down on the horrified spectators below. The shocked general stood there with his mouth hanging open. He then gritted his teeth and ordered 3 more jets into the attack. "He just got lucky," he said to Newton's children. But Newton's craft was too fast for the missiles now. When the barrage of many missiles were launched, the ship was quickly able to dodge them. "Yes, yes, yes," cheered Jeff Branco over the horrified screams of the Sardonians below. The missiles that missed his parents were causing great destruction on the city skyscrapers, raining more death and destruction on the spectators. "Excellent," shouted Jeff. "If you try to kill our parents, you will be responsible for the destruction of the city." The general cursed and swore and shouted at Newton's children. "It's Newton's fault. He's the one who is using the city as a bodyguard." General Zelnos then shouted into his transmitter, moving closer on Newton. Seeing that the jets were closing in on them, Newton brushed the perspiration from his brow and said, "So they want to get closer to us?" Newton swung his little spacecraft down closer to the high-rises. He began to fly extremely close to the sides of the buildings, knocking out a row of windows in one of the buildings. "No!" screamed General Zeldas when a jet in hot pursuit exploded into a skyscraper. "Yay!" cheered Jeff and Shirley when another crashed and burned after flying through a bulletin board that was advertising for the Air Force. One jet became very cocky and chased a little craft down just several feet above the streets. The jet had its machine guns blazing. But being that Newton's craft was well shielded, all the jet's bullets were deflected off of it, causing massive death and destruction down the boulevard. Newton couldn't believe the stupidity of the jet fighter that was on his tail. He angrily swung his ship up and quickly shot down another street. So quick was the move that his careless pursuer became very disoriented, and ended up ricocheting from building to building before exploding into a now very panic-stricken crowd of people. "Wah!" screamed General Zelnos. He pulled at his hair and stamped his feet as he saw the words "civilian life" flash through his military-minded brain. Back up in the sky, Newton couldn't believe all the carnage that was going on. I can't be responsible for this," he moaned. And he ended up taking his ship up out of the city. When the craft began to leave the area of the skyscrapers, the general snickered wickedly and ordered the jets to attack Newton in the open. The leader of the 4 remaining fighter jets unleashed his last missile. It would have made contact, but Newton quickly got an idea. He caused his little spacecraft to fly quickly up against the side of one of the jets. Then, right as the missile was about to hit him, he would quickly shoot the little spacecraft away. "No!" screamed General Zelnos. "Yes!" screamed Jeff and Shirley. The evasive action of Newton caused the missile to miss him and strike the jet fighter instead. As another jet crashed and exploded into a row of apartment buildings below, the now nearly insane general just stood on the roof, shaking his fist and swearing at the sky Newton was apparently king in. Newton shook his fist with happy excitement, brushed the sweat from his brow, and shouted, "We did it, Sheena! We did it! We made it so they can't fire on us without giving themselves a bloody nose. Now we can leave this hellish existence and go home." Newton yelled with happy tears of joy, but Newton noticed that Sheena didn't reply to his happy excitement. He quickly turned and noticed that Sheena was looking in a bad way. A tear rolled down her once beautiful cheek as she raised a shaky hand, then dropped it. All Newton could say was, "Sheena, no!" The ducking and dodging missile fire had taken a terrible toll on one so old now. "I don't feel so hot," she managed to say, looking like a talking corpse. As Newton tried to make things comfortable for his rapidly ailing wife, his children wondered why they weren't leaving when they now had the power to leave. "I'm hurt bad," said Sheena. "I don't think I'm going to make the trip." "You'll make it, Sheena. We'll make it. The warp engines are just about ready." And Newton pressed up on the throttle, taking the little ship higher and higher into the atmosphere. As the little ship quickly tried to make its escape, the general got word over the radio that Sardonna's most advanced fighter jet was now headed into the area. The general yelled into his transmitter for the superjet to destroy Newton before he could reach the upper atmosphere. "Roger, Wilco," replied the proud jet fighter with determination. He spotted Newton's little spaceship in his sights and quickly sent his jet screaming at him. Not only was his fighter jet carrying advanced missiles, it was also carrying one large, heavy missile that was so powerful that it could level an entire city block. Suddenly, right when Newton was about to press the button to the warp engines, the superjet flew in and exploded a missile into the little spaceship's shields, terrifying the Brancos and making all who witnessed the new attack cheer the Sardonian ole known as "Ah-yah." In the spacecraft, Newton found himself sitting lopsided in his seat. Electrical fires were springing up out of the controls. He desperately pressed the button to the warp engines to warp them out of hell's way, but right after he pressed the button, nothing happened. "Oh no!" Newton cried with horror. The blast they had received from the jet fighter had shorted out the wiring to the warp engines. A sick, sinking feeling came over Newton when he realized that he and his wife were now trapped on the infernal planet. There was no time to cry, though. Newton saw the superjet quickly circling around to unleash another missile at them. "Forgive me, Sheena," he yelled. Newton hated to use it, realizing the devastating effect its evasive action had on Sheena, but he had to do it. When the second missile was fired, Newton quickly shot his craft out of the way and flew it to another jet, but when he quickly pulled it away in order to destroy one of his attackers, the missile didn't lock onto the jet, but exploded right near the little craft, shaking it about violently and causing more electrical fires to spring up inside. Realizing that the new missiles were impossible to outmaneuver without them exploding, Newton took the little ship back over the city and tried to use the skyscrapers as shields once more. Captain Baydab, the pilot of the superjet, was hesitant of trying to attack Newton around the high-rises, but the general ordered him to attack anyway. "Aye-ya!" cheered the mass of spectators when a missile exploded near Newton, sending his craft flying out of the control and lightly hitting the edge of a skyscraper. "Aye-ya!" they cheered again when the exploding missile sent the little spacecraft spinning out of control and taking out a row of windows on another skyscraper. The agonized cries of Sheena tormented Newton. The superjet screamed in and rained machine gun bullets into those little craft's shields. Shirley and Jeff couldn't stand to see what the superjet was doing to their parents. They began begging and pleading with the general to call off the attack, telling him that Newton never attacked Sardonna. Their pleas fell on deaf ears as the general called the other two jets into the fun. When the three remaining jets only had one missile each, a quarter of the city's skyscrapers were in flames, and the little spaceship was now seen with a little trail of red smoke coming from behind it. Crying, Shirley begged incoherently at the general's feet to get him to stop. The guards that protected the general just laughed. "Almost, almost," yelled General Zelnus, shaking his fist with victory. Although it was hopeless, Newton tried desperately to find the short circuit that would help warp them out of the atmosphere. "Aye-ya!" cheered the Sardonians when a jet flew in and fired its last missile into the side of the spaceship, blasting it into the 50-story wall of a skyscraper. "Aye-ya!" they cheered again when another jet flew in and sprayed the jet with machine guns. The slight bluish glow of the ship's shields was beginning to flicker on and off now, but before they would be easily hit again, Newton rocketed his ship out of the side of the skyscraper and pointed its nose for the stars, realizing that the chances of reaching them were now 0. Newton turned slowly and looked sadly at Sheena. "You've given up dodging them, haven't you?" asked a sad, achy Sheena. Newton slowly nodded his head. She then asked him, "The warp engines, they're gone, aren't they?" Newton felt tears running down his face. He shook his head for a yes. With shaky hands, Newton put a cassette tape into his ship's cassette player. It was a cassette that contained music that they enjoyed on their honeymoon. I wanted to play this for you on our trip through space," said Newton. Sheena started crying. Back in the city on the top of the skyscraper, the sadness of Newton's children was actually having somewhat of effect on the general. He was actually pacing back and forth, pondering what they were pondering, wondering if he should give the final order to have the superjet try out its strongest missile on Newton's force field. What do you want?" asked Baydab, the pilot of the superjet. "This bird can't stay up here all day." General Zelnos then turned to the two emotional offspring of Newton and Sheena and said, "I wish I could believe you that your dad wasn't the monster that killed my dad and the millions of others on our planet. But what if you are just very good actors? If I let him go now, and he returns to get the ship that attacked us 60 years ago, I'm going to feel like the biggest fool in the universe. Look, I'm sorry, but I've got to stop him." Zelnus then turned to his microphone and said, "Finish him." And at that order, the superjet roared in and fired its last average missile into the heart of the little spaceship. "Hi-ya!" roared the massive crowds in a wave of excitement. The battle was now being viewed all over the planet by satellite. The children of Newton acted as if the explosion was a knife that stabbed them. So strong was the explosion that it totally blew out the force field system, making Sheena scream. Before Newton could sit up in his seat, the two other jets roared in and rained their machine gun bullets on the now reachable ship's outer hull, shattering the glass window and now causing strong winds to blow about the control room of the craft. He began to laugh and laugh, a mixture of laughing and crying all at the same time. Sheena started laughing also. They both laughed due to the tremendous feeling of absurdity, especially when they began to realize all the hours, days, and years of hard, planned-out calculations, of dreaming and hoping to build a spaceship that would help them escape a planet that was very unwelcome to them, even from the very start, of hoping and praying that the spaceship they built would take them to a much better place, but was now all being dashed by one pesky and primitive 20th century contraption of war. Sheena quit laughing, looked incredibly heartbroken at Newton asked, "Why?" But right before Newton could respond, the superjet roared in again with its machine guns blazing. The raining bullets of death struck the ship again. "Ah-yah!" roared the excited crowds. "No!" cried the Branco children. "Yes!" said the general. "Sheena!" cried Newton, holding his now dying wife in his arms. The superjet began to do little twirls and whirls of victory over the city's skyline. Newton buried his face in his dead wife's breast and cried. Sheena, who Newton knew and loved for nearly 70 years, was gone. "It's over. It's over," resigned Jeff said, hugging his crying sister. The three jets just kept on circling the little smoking craft that was now hovering over the burning city. Newton held his wife close to him and cried, "We're in hell, Sheena, in hell." Suddenly, one of the jets swung in and fired its machine guns again, hitting Sheena's body and blowing a hole in Newton's shoulder. Newton gave out a loud, agonized yell. "Yes," said Captain Badab of the superjet when he saw the little craft whirling out of control over the city, not realizing the great wrath he had just unleashed inside of Newton. Instead of great sadness over the loss of wife and hope due to the planet's attack on him, Newton quickly began to feel rage. The bullet through the shoulder worked as a switch that had suddenly switched Newton's feelings of self-pity to that of incredible hate and revenge on everything and anything Sardonian. Now that his wife was dead, Newton didn't have to be slow in his avoidance of missiles. He could now fire the engines up to the point of his limits. Suddenly, right when another jet was about to unleash its last missile on him, Newton transferred full power to the engines and escaped the path of the missile, creating a terrifying sonic boom that shattered the windows. "I don't like the looks of this," responded a now wary general. Newton's children knew why the craft was now traveling like it was. And since they knew, a furious Jeff shouted with his fist raised to the sky, "Tear them up! Tear them up!" The little craft was now traveling a lot faster than the 1960-looking jets could travel. It quickly flew at Mach 12 and rammed a jet, causing it to explode on impact. The general quickly ordered the other jets out of the area, but before they could respond, the little spacecraft swung in and caused another to explode on impact, leaving the superjet as the last and final flying adversary. "Get him! Get him!" yelled Jeff and Shirley. The superjet tried to escape as fast as it could, but Newton's craft was faster. Newton began to fly his ship in front of the now terrified superjet as to make it crash into him. The fast reflexes of the pilot was able to avoid the collision, but Newton put his craft in front of his path again and again, forcing the jet to fly back over the city. The now panicking Captain Badab of the superjet tried to down Newton with backfiring machine guns, but Newton kept on coming. The Sardonians stood in stunned amazement as they watched their brave hero try to use the skyscrapers as shields like Newton had done previously, but Newton's craft was gaining on him. Newton was so furious that he was now flying his craft right through the skyscraper walls in order to destroy the one who destroyed his life. Suddenly, as the superjet tried to avoid hitting one of the tall, burning skyscrapers, Newton forced the craft down on it, striking the superjet's wing off, causing it to spin wildly out of control. Right when the pilot was about to jettison himself to safety, the superjet slammed into the bottom of a 130-story high-rise and exploded, setting off the detonation to the missile. The missile's explosion was so great that all the high-rises in the area were violently shaken. So violent was the explosion, and so weak was the skyscraper after surviving the earthquake, that the mountainous building's foundation crumbled rapidly, sending it tilting in a frightening manner. The burning monstrosity did more than just tilt. It was now tipping, and falling to the side, heading right to the direction of another skyscraper. The thousands of people inside the burning behemoth grabbed at anything they felt would stop their fall, yet all was in vain. A loud, thundering roar echoed throughout the horrified metropolis as the two giant structures made contact, throwing their inhabitants through the windows and down into the streets. But the horror was not over. The jarring impact of the missile The jarring impact of millions of tons of steel girders and concrete snapped the second skyscraper off of its foundation, sending it down into the direction of yet another. Ah! Screamed the Sardonians down the streets as huge, dangerous buildings began to move like dominoes over their heads. Jeff and Shirley stood stunned at the sound of it. They nearly fainted at the sight of it, staring with a mixture of awe and horror at the juggernaut of death their father's wrath had unexpectedly unleashed on his tormentors. The horrible fury in Newton's face quickly left and became replaced with a look of stunned amazement at the realization of what his revenge had wrought. When the seventh and last skyscraper finished the tragic domino effect by crushing thousands in the street, sorrow began to fill Newton's eyes once more over the tragedy that had befallen him and the unlucky bystanders that got in his way. Through the black smoke that was now thick over the burning city skyline, the little craft flew. Jeff, Shirley, and the military that held them prisoners watched the little craft fly around the flaming towers, looking like a giant, aimless fly against a beautiful Sardonian sunset. Now that there was no one around to confront him, Newton was able to notice that his children were up on the top of one of the skyscrapers. Although the building they were on was also burning, Newton knew that they would be soon carried away to safety, being that it was only he whom Sardonna wanted. Newton then began to fly his little spacecraft about his children. He began to dip it up and down in order to acknowledge their presence. When his children were waving sadly at him, and the military was shooting at him, Newton swung the craft down and then headed out over the sea with ground-to-air missiles rapidly approaching him. As the missiles accelerated in their pursuit, Newton took the lifeless hand of Sheena and held it close to him. He then gunned the engines as far as they would go, creating G-forces that began to grow rapidly into killing intensity. So fast was the little spaceship traveling now, that it began to smoke from the friction of the atmosphere. Then, right when the missiles were about to hit, Newton used every last bit of his strength and pushed the throttle down. The little ship that Newton and his family wished would take them to the beckoning stars struck the sea. Back on the continent, Jeff, Shirley, and all who looked out toward the sea witnessed an intense flash of light spread out over the horizon. The incredible explosion of Newton's antimatter engines was last fear generating sight in the hearts of the Sardonians. Although the atomic cloud was frightening, it created a magnificent sunset, a beautiful symbol that the human suffering of Newton had ceased. And so ends Newton as a man. But who knows, Newton may return again, just as strange as he became. This girl here, her mother's white, but her dad is black, and she was the prettiest black girl I ever saw, body-wise, if you know what I mean. Really, really well put together. Voluptuous, luscious female. And she's pretty too. A Lorraine Newman type of girl. But, oh, here's a picture of me right here. Oh yeah. I weighed about 165 pounds there. Of course, with this videotape, I must weigh about 100. I must look like I weigh about 175 there. Let's see here. I knew this guy. That's a pretty girl, I think. Her name is Carrie Salisbury. But I'll show you the girl that I was attracted to. Oh, this girl likes me, believe it or not. This one right here, little Susie Homemaker. Her name was Jan Michelle Smith. A really good actress. She was in my drama department. Oh yeah, here's the girl that I was attracted to. Let's see if I can find her. Yeah. Kathy Ann Thompson. Not a very good picture of her, but she was really a sexy girl. She was going with this guy, this really rich guy. And the rich guy got mononucleosis and she dumped him. But I saw her about 2 years ago, and she's still foxy as ever. Kathy Ann Thompson. I have her phone number. She works for Channel 10. She's a behind-the-scenes girl. Here's Johnny. Over now.
It's provided by Matt.
This truck is interesting.
Sure is.
Tomorrow,
Today's the 15th, 1992, January.
it's almost a year since you had a Haagen-Dazs bar.
It was exactly a year ago that I was excited.
Haagen-Dazs.
I sure was.
I sure was.
Let's see how you turn that on.